afternoon, everybody. I guess I'll start off with reminding everybody to turn off their cell phones. I am Cappy Powell, and I'm very happy to welcome back to the Johann Fust Library Loggia and Courtyard the highly acclaimed author Roxana Robinson. Roxana is the author of 11 books and has been published in England, France, Germany, the Netherlands, and Spain. Roxana is also an important part of our 75th year history. She was our very first literary series speaker. And that was in 2015, so 11 years ago. Roxana has won many awards for her writing and has received fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Guggenheim Foundation, and was named a literary lion at the New York Public Library. I mention only a few of her many awards and literary recognitions because for those of us who know or have been fortunate enough to serve with Alice Gorman on the Johann Fust Library Foundation board, we know Roxana is a great friend of Alice's. One of the awards Roxana has received is the Barnes & Noble's Writers for Writers Award. For our board, and especially for our program committee, the equivalent of our Writer for Writer Award is a recommendation for a speaker from Alice Gorman. When Alice speaks, we listen. Roxana, Alice was so thrilled when you accepted our invitation to once again be a part of our literary series. And she so wanted to be the one in conversation with you today. That was her goal. Unfortunately, her health is most important to her today, and our thoughts are certainly with her. To use an idiom to describe today's program, who do you get to fill Alice's shoes to be in conversation with Roxana? Fortunately, fellow board member Nan Doyal has stepped in. Nan is also an award-winning author. She is founder and executive director of Casper Press, an independent publisher. Thank you, Nan, for stepping in to fill Alice's very big shoes.
I just want to say I cannot fill those shoes, but I will do my best at partially filling them today. So let me ask all of you, how many of you have read Leaving? Oh, good. You're in for a wonderful treat. So I read this book 2 years ago, February 2024, I think when it first came out. And I was really excited to get the opportunity to read it again last night. So, and so happy to be able to spend the morning actually with Roxana as we caught up and got to know each other. And I promised her I wouldn't ask her any questions this morning, what I'm going to ask her this afternoon. So this is all new material here. I'm going to learn as you learn. But I thought it'd be good, actually, since a few people have read the book, for the benefit of everybody else, if you would give us an overview of or synopsis of Leaving.
Okay, can you hear me? Is it working? Okay. First of all, thank you all for coming. I know the golf course is calling. I know the beach is calling, so I'm grateful that you're here. And I can't thank the library enough for inviting me back. And we're all sending thoughts to Alice. Okay, so cell phones off, maybe. So synopsis, the way the book starts is at the Metropolitan Opera, and there are two people there who haven't seen each other in 30 years. They had a relationship when they were in college, and that ended through a misunderstanding, just ended very abruptly, and they both married other people, and they haven't seen each other since then. They're 60, both of them. And Warren, the man, is still married, and Sarah, the woman, is divorced, and her ex-husband died. So she is alone, and he is not. They both have adult children. And so the story is about what happens next at that stage in your life. And one of the things that interested me was the fact that what we're drawn to is stories about people who connect to each other. The love story is sort of central to Western literature, and the family, the story of the family. So we've all heard the story of Romeo and Juliet. We've all heard from John Cheever and John Updike. We know about the midlife crisis and the affair in the 40s, but we haven't really had books about people who are in the next phase of their life. And I was really interested to think about that. When you're in your 20s and you fall in love with someone, you can do whatever you want. You can move to Australia for a year. You can choose to go to China and learn Chinese. You have no responsibilities if you've finished college, and you can just set off. If you meet somebody when you're 60, you're in a completely different stage. You have a career, you have a family, you have a place you've lived. And I was really interested to start thinking about what the issues were for people in that situation. I know one couple of whom the man lived in Pennsylvania and the woman lived in Skaneateles, an 8-hour drive. She had a career, he had a career, and they ended up by splitting up just because of the geography and the connections that they both had in their lives. So that idea of the life you have made versus the life you might choose is a very complicated and interesting one to me. So I wanted to write about what it's like to fall in love at that stage in your life.
Was there an incident or a couple that you saw that actually inspired that, or is that something that kind of built over time?
Well, as I say, I became interested in this because I was watching people start relationships and run into these problems. Yeah.
Right. So when you started to write this, how much of the story did you know when you started to write? And then how much evolved as you got into it, and how did that happen?
This book, usually I don't know when I start what the ending will be. I have a sense of what direction I'm going, but I don't really know the ending. But in this book, I did know the ending. I'm not going to tell you.
And what an ending it is. So let's see, I had an interesting, so there's much more than just the relationship between this couple that happens in this book. There's also the complicated relationship that they have with their children and one of the spouse and the spouse of Warren, the husband. And so there was more than just that happened. So how did that evolve? Was that also something you wanted to explore further? Because they're difficult. This didn't run smoothly.
So, that's what I'm saying. At that stage in your life, you have obligations to other people as well as you can't just say, I love you and let's run off together. So they both have adult children. And in all those sort of classic midlife breakup stories, the kids are little, and you can tell them you're going to your father's for the weekend, whether you like it or not. You're going to do that. If you have a 22-year-old, you are not saying that to that 22-year-old. She's going to decide what she does for the weekend. And I know when I have been doing readings, there are lots of people in the audience who come up and say, "This is my story. This is what happened to my family. My sister has done this or that." So that's part of this relationship between the two people. They're not individuals who can function on their own anymore. They can only function within the family, and that's a complicated, tangled sort of web. So, and if you've been married or you are married, you can't necessarily just walk away. Those are the stories that we've read about people who just walk away, but it's not always that simple.
So one of the really interesting things that happens in this book is that the way that Roxana develops her characters, and this is one of the things I love about her writing, is that she doesn't tell you anything about them, but she puts them in these really difficult positions, and you watch the way they react to each other in these situations. And I'm going to tell you, nothing about this book is predictable. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about reading this, and why I still remember it 2 years later and was really excited to do this, is that there are very few authors that can really do this, that can show you who their characters are by the way that they relate to each other. And there's also something else that happens, but I'm going to ask that next. But I couldn't help but wonder, as a writer and as an editor, how you do that. And you may not do that consciously, but try to explain how you do that, because it really is special how you develop your characters.
So that's not really something I can answer in any useful way, because the way the story develops is with characters and a problem, and they need to live their way through that. So after Warren and Sarah meet at the opera, he suggests that they have dinner. So then I have to imagine, where do they have dinner? What is that restaurant like? All these, and then what happens when she walks through the door? What's his gesture? How does she respond to that? What does he say? All these things are about how they find their way to each other, how they respond to what the waitress says. All those are things that unfold as I'm writing the scene. I'm not thinking, I want him. I know what Warren is like. When I start writing a book, I write little précis of each character. So I know what their background is, I know where they grew up, I know what schools they went to. So I have a very strong sense of who the character is. So I know who Warren is. And what does he say? What does he do when he sees Sarah in the doorway? That's what he would do. He does it, and that informs you about his character.
Much more complicated later, too, as the relationship evolves and things become difficult with the other family members, how Warren responds to his wife, to his daughter in particular, who's a very pivotal character in this. And that I'm kind of curious to the daughter. I don't think I'm going to give anything away if I say this.
He has a daughter.
He has a daughter. And she's a character, to say the least. So tell me about, like, for example, Kat, his daughter. Did she evolve as a response to him, or did you have a person in mind as you developed it? Because you're going to know this character you can't get away from.
She's very powerful.
Yeah.
One reader came up to me after an event like this, and she said, I'm Kat. I'm totally Kat. I know what she's like. And I'm not giving you too much away. She's trying to save her parents' marriage. She feels she's an only child. She feels that's her responsibility. And it means that she undertakes some very extreme behavior to do that. But again, it's right, the scene, Warren goes to see her as he would. What's her apartment like? What does she say when she sees him? That all sort of evolves because of the situation, because who she is, because he is. I don't say I want her scene to show how extreme they both feel. Warren gets on a plane. He sees her before she leaves for work. What does she say?
Okay, but I can't help but ask you, where do you get this from? I mean, are there people you knew? Are you imagining yourself in this position?
As I say, I start out with a very clear sense in my mind of who these people are. And then that determines how they behave in these situations. I know what Kat is like. I know exactly what Kat is like. I kind of love Kat. She's awful, but I love her.
Really?
I do. Because she's so fierce.
She really is fierce. And to some degree, destructive, too. I guess we could argue about that.
Well, that's not how she sees it.
Yeah, of course.
And that's not her intention.
Right.
So I give her that.
Mm-hmm. But this is the other interesting thing that happens in your book, I find, is you've created this space for me to come in as a reader and be in there. So we just had a different opinion on Kat, which is one of the things I love about the way she's written this book, too, is that certainly she gives you a perspective of each character by how they respond to the other characters. But I feel very much in control as a reader as I go through this, that I can fill some of the voids with my own perspective. And that is a wonderful experience as a reader, because there's a lot of things that happen in this, and I'm going to stop talking so much, but I'm just from my point of view, there's a lot of moral questions here. There's a lot of questions about passion. It's this time in my life. Don't I have a right to this? No, you don't. You have obligations. I mean, there's all these questions. And you put your reader in the middle of all this. And while your characters are making decisions, so is your reader. Are you aware you do that?
Well, it's a subject that I am very interested in. And really, at the center of this, and at the center of a lot of my books, is the question of honor. And who are you as a person? And what is your sense of your own honor? Honor isn't a word that is used in public discourse at this point in our civil life, but it is something that everyone in this room has a sense of. You know that there's a red line for you. There's something that you would never do because that's not the person you are. You have a sense of yourself and your own sense of honor. So this book is asking a question. What is your understanding of your own personal code of honor?
So you're going to enjoy this. So a question more on craft, on how you wrote this. Lots of questions, but you chose, every author chooses a point of view. And in this case, you chose a third person point of view, but there's also some other stuff that's going on there that I felt as I read it. Consciously decided to write it that way, wrote it different ways first?
I'm not sure what you mean.
So you tell the story from both Sarah's and Warren's point of view, so it moves back and forth seamlessly, I might add. You know, you have to kind of pay attention to that. And it's in the present tense, which is also interesting. For the on and off.
It's the past is in the past tense. The
Present is in the present tense, yeah. So was that a conscious choice to tell it that way? Or did it just feel right?
I can't answer that question. It's just how I wrote it.
Just how you wrote it.
Yeah.
So one of the things that also happens in it, which is really interesting as the story goes on, I think, you tell me, is so you're looking at things from Warren's point of view. And at one point, I feel he becomes unreliable. That he sees the world in a certain way, his wife and his child. And I don't know if I agree with the way he's seen the situation.
Well, you're allowed to have your own point of view. You can. I mean, I've had readers come up and say, I think, and I say, okay, we don't agree, but you're the reader. You're allowed to understand this book the way you want to. I can't control that.
Yes.
I can give you the story and these characters, and some people say, I hated so-and-so, and I say, you're allowed to. You can hate that character. I don't. But yeah, I'm telling you the story. I'm telling you how the characters feel. They don't see things the same way always.
Brilliant. It's wonderful. I really loved it, the experience of that. So in terms of structuring it, though, you decided to do it chronologically, and you started with the opera. So why?
Okay, that's a great question, and I, once again, am unable to answer it. I can't tell you how that happened. My husband introduced me to opera years and years ago. I would never have been an opera goer without him. But he sort of drew me into that world without ever telling me why he loved it. He wasn't lecturing me, and I thought it was a silly, affected, inauthentic, ridiculous art form. Now I really love it, and I think I was ridiculous before. And I saw a performance of Tosca, which a reader asked me to track down, I think it was 2018, which was so extraordinary. So when you write, you're telling a story, but you're also drawing on your own experience. I mean, every novelist draws on their own experience, even if they're writing about life on Mars. You have to pull in your own consciousness, your own understanding of the world. So this was a performance that I saw that was incredibly moving. And I just wanted to put it down somewhere, to set it down, to record that experience. And it turned out to be the opening of the book. And I can't tell you, I didn't have 6 things that were possibilities, and I did eeny, meeny, miny, mo, or it just was that was the way I wanted to start out with Sarah and Warren, partly because it's a splendid place physically. It's fabulous. I'm sure you've all been there. So that building with the central atrium, the chandeliers, it's a place of sort of mythic beauty and ceremonial sense of the great stories of mankind. Operas are about great tragedies, great love stories. So the whole idea of human relationship is elevated by being in that space. And the fact that Sarah and Warren were both there singly, they were there not for social reasons, but because they engaged very deeply with this art form in this space, sort of set the scene for me as the opening to my story.
You come back to it in the book, as Sarah does, certainly, right? She comes back throughout the book. So it's a thread that really gets carried, that opera, the story of the opera. You see it throughout in all the different acts, all 5 acts of your book. You divided the book into 5 parts, 5 acts.
I didn't know that.
Yep, you did.
Thank you.
Isn't it fun when readers read so much more into your work than you ever thought of? There's the whole, right? Reading world is filled with that. We read much more, which actually kind of leads me to another question that is further down my list here. But I love asking this question, and I'm not going to believe you if you say that nothing has happened in this regard. But when we write a book as an author, and we go out into the world and we meet readers, one of the things I've noticed is that book becomes much bigger than what we wrote, right? Like it touches readers in ways we never expected, and they come back and tell us things. Has that happened to you? And what kinds of things have come back? What surprised you?
Well, as I say, I can't really talk about the responses without spoilers, but lots of people have come and said this struck a bell for me because this is what happened in my family, or yeah, I can't really explain with that. I can't really talk about it without giving it away. So, but yes, it's wonderful for me to have people come up and say, this is what I thought about the book. Often it's not something, I didn't know it was separated into 5 parts. That's very good for me to know. I should know that, shouldn't I? And the opera, parts of that I sort of went back later in the book and put the earlier references in, but that was a wonderful thing for me to have as a sort of a strain to weave throughout the book. But yeah, people's responses are wonderful because it feels as though we are both part of a living organism. This reader who comes up and says, this is what I thought, and I say, that's great, it's just what I meant, or I say that I never thought of that. I'm glad you raised it. I'm so glad you found something in it.
Do you feel it's changed what you might do going forward, or has it changed anything about how you think about how you write?
No.
Yeah, I should say that. Okay, you do one thing in here that I love, and we've talked about this, the dog. Let's talk about the dog.
So there is a dog with a big part in this book. She's named Bella, and she's a black standard poodle. Yes, I have a black standard poodle. And the one I have now is my 4th. She's not Bella. Bella was the previous one, whose real name was Lacey. And the reason I put her in the book was that years ago, there was a book called The Secret Life of Dogs. And I forget the name of the author, but Elizabeth Marshall Thomas. And so it was a wonderful book. If you love dogs, everybody read that book. And Elizabeth Marshall Thomas lived in the same town that my sister lived in New Hampshire. And my sister said, oh, my sister Roxana is a writer. She loves dogs. And Elizabeth said, well, does she write about dogs? And my sister said, no, never. And she said to me, why do you not? So Thomas said to her, well, if she loves them and she's a writer, why doesn't she write about them? And my sister asked me, and I said, because I love dogs too much to make them a minor character. I'm not going to have some yellow lab come into the room where they're fighting and then gets fed and goes out again. That dogs are too important to me. So that was in the back of my mind, that I always thought I should give a dog a bigger role in one of my books, a real character, because you all know dogs are real characters and play a big part in our lives. And Sarah is single. She lives alone in the country, and her dog is a big part of her life. And it gave me a chance to set Lacey down on the page and give her a larger presence in the world.
Would you read something if I gave it to you, where you describe Bella? This is my favorite passage, but maybe you have one. And I didn't even tell her I was going to do this. Or I can read it, but I think it's better if you read it. To all dog lovers. Down there at the bottom right.
Bella is more interested in words that deliver information. When Sarah leaves, she says, "I'll be back." Sarah thinks Bella understands this, though Bella may think it means, "I'm never coming back." Her ears droop, her tail stills. When Sarah talks on the phone to Meg, the last thing she says before she hangs up is, "I love you." When she hears those words, Bella leaps to her feet, knowing that now Sarah will do something new. Living with Bella is like having a familiar, a small, unpredictable spirit who knows you intimately, who is deeply involved in your life in ways you don't quite understand, who feels she shares your soul, and who is always, always present.
Okay, let me ask you to create these beautiful words. Tell us a little bit about your process. Well, you and I didn't talk about this morning. I'm dying to know. How do you write? When do you write? How does it work?
So I write in the mornings, every morning when I can. I mean, tomorrow morning I'm going to be in the car going to the airport, so I can't. But every morning, first thing. And when I'm writing a book, I usually have one other book that I use as a kind of a touchstone, and I will read a few pages of that book before I settle in to write, to remind myself of a certain kind of rhythm and a certain kind of word usage. When I was writing Cost, I was reading Michael Cunningham's book, The Hours, every morning. I would just read a couple of pages because his prose is so beautiful. And when I was writing Sparta, I read, what's that book? Ian McEwan's book about, there's a part of Atonement, yeah. There's just one section of that I read that was set in the war. So there's something that I will read just to remind myself of the way I want words to flow. That's really all I can say. I struggle with every sentence. Every sentence gets rewritten over and over. Sometimes I can only write 2 sentences a day. I write a sentence, I take it out, I put it in the beginning of the paragraph, I take it out, I put it at the end. So the sentences, for me, need to be not only delivering information, you need to know what the dog is doing at that moment, but also every word in the sentence needs to be perfectly aligned with the other words in the sentence, and the sentences need to be perfectly aligned in the paragraph so that it is all seamless. So it's like the surface of a fish. Every scale overlaps the one beneath it, and there's no friction. Your hand passes perfectly over the surface. So it's awful. Yeah.
And for leaving, did you have a book you were reading? Did you have a book for leaving?
I think I was reading Tessa Hadley for that, who is a wonderful English novelist. If you don't know her work, I encourage you to have a look at it. I think I was reading The Past when I read that.
For a lot of your books, you've done quite a bit of research. This one, did you do research for this one?
No, this one is really, trying to think. Yeah, this is the first one in 5 or 6 books that I hadn't had to do any research on. It was easy. That didn't mean it was easy to write. It was awful, but I didn't have to do research. Yeah.
Yeah, awful because.
Oh, because you get, I mean, I was looking back through my journals. I say the same thing about every book. This book is terrible. It's like walking through mud. None of these sentences mean anything. Who cares about these people? Yeah, that's how I always feel.
So you're sort of shocked by what I just said about your book, how wonderful it was. And
Well, I know that once it's finished, it takes on it has a new character.
yeah.
And certainly when it comes back as a book, it's a new thing. It's not what was on my screen. But writing the sentences is always challenging.
So tell me, why did you call it Leaving? And was that the title from the beginning?
No. And it was not my choice. My choice was The Other Life, which I think is a much better title. My editor thought that suggested a kind of spiritualism, and so she balked. But anyway, it's called Leaving for reasons that will become obvious if you read it.
So besides writing, I'm just going to touch on a couple of things, other things that you do that I think inform your writing too. You're a teacher, and you teach classic literature. And you and I talked a little bit about this morning, but how do you think that those kinds of books inform your writing, if they do? And how do you read them and so on?
So I teach a literature class in the Hunter MFA program. And I teach Madame Bovary, Anna Karenina, To the Lighthouse, and Beloved. And the book is called The Introduction to the Modern. So it is moving from the Romantic movement and Sir Walter Scott to Flaubert, who was a realist, and then Madame Bovary, and then Anna Karenina. So there are many things. I mean, from Anna Karenina, which is one of the great, read it. It's one of the greatest novels ever written. There are things that I try to remember. Velocity is one of them. It's one of the most beautifully smoothly moving books ever written, so that every chapter, every sentence, and every paragraph takes you to a place you weren't before. Compassion. Tolstoy is one of the most compassionate people on the planet. Virginia Woolf, the beauty of the language. Virginia Woolf grew up in a household in which poetry was part of the daily life. She would read at breakfast from the English book of the Oxford Book of English poetry. Her father recited poetry, so there's this sense of poetry in her writing, which is extremely powerful. It's almost like a prose poem, her novels. So that is very important to me, that feeling of each word being, the necessity of every word being beautiful and the way the word fits into the sentence. You don't make a sentence full of long words. You make sure that the rhythm of the sentence is beautiful and that it connects to this rhythm of this next sentence. And Woolf is a magnificent example of a writer who does that.
Which kind of makes me think, I think reading obviously helps you fill your well, in terms of filling the things that you'll draw from to create and write. But are there other ways that you do that as a writer?
Well, being a writer is an interesting experience because it involves two things that are mutually exclusive. And one is being alone and the other is being with people. And I can't write unless I'm alone, unless I'm really alone. One of my writer friends said that the most terrifying sound in the world to her is footsteps. Somebody's going to come and knock on the door of the study. So you have to be deeply alone. Know that nobody is going to bother you. You can turn off your computer, you can turn off mail, so that you are completely alone in your own mind. On the other hand, if you don't see anybody, you aren't drawing on the world for your experience. And empathy and compassion are big parts of being a novelist, in my view. So unless you see people and talk to people and hear their stories and just see people on the street and think, why is she doing that? Or why is he behaving this way? Every time you see someone and wonder about them, you are absorbing more information about the world and about the human condition.
So do you keep track of that in a journal, or how do you do that? How do you capture that?
I keep a journal sporadically. It doesn't have everything every day in it. Things that strike me are there, but there's some things. I don't think I ever wrote about that night at the opera in my journal, but it was just indelibly there in my mind. It's something that I treasured and I wanted to use. Yeah, so I don't. It's not that I write things in my journal and then go back and read them. Actually, I hate rereading my journal. It all seems ridiculous. But I did reread that for one reason. So I saw something. I was looking at what I was thinking when I was writing Leaving, which was, this is a terrible book. I always think that.
I beg to differ on that, of course, as you know. Let's see. I had another question for you. I'm having one of those moments where I completely forgot. One other thing I did want to talk about, you and I talked about this morning, was besides all this teaching and writing, you're also involved in the Authors Guild. We had a very interesting discussion about that this morning, because stepping back from writing and daily and so on are the bigger issues of what face authors and readers in going forward, particularly with technology. But can you give us a sense of like some of the big issues you think are facing us as writers, as readers, as publishers?
Yeah, so I have been involved with the Authors Guild for years and years, and I was the president at one point. And the Authors Guild, if any of you are writers or aspiring writers, I encourage you to join it. AI is presenting a huge challenge to the publishing world, to the writing world, to the reading world. The Authors Guild is, among other things, creating a gold sort of circle that publishers can put on their books that says human authored, so you know you're not reading AI. And we also, we're in the process of creating a set of guidelines so that writers should know that if they write a text that has a lot of AI in it, they have to sign a contract with the publishers who will reject it if it turns out there's AI in it. So there's a professional reason not to use AI, although there's a huge sort of tide of a current of people thinking, oh, this is the new thing, I should use it. It makes things so much easier. You just type in, two people in their 60s want to connect, meet at the opera, tell me what happens next, and AI will tell you. But there are lots of reasons not to use AI. One is that it's destroying the planet. It's highly, highly energy intensive. And two is, if you want somebody else to write your book, why would you bother trying to write it yourself? The whole point of writing a book is getting your own thoughts and feelings in order. That's why I write, is because I have something to say, not that AI does. So the Authors Guild is involved in those things. We also sued Anthropic. I don't know if you know about that lawsuit. It was a class action brought up against Anthropic, which is an AI sort of library. And we sued them for two reasons. We won on one and lost on the other. And what Anthropic did was to take literally millions of books and use I don't know how they do it, but anyway, they create this something called a large language system, which is based on all of our books, which they have taken without permission and without giving us royalties. And that's what they draw on. If I write in a question saying, what happens to Warren and Sarah, they're drawing on my book and millions of other books. And at the Authors Guild, we said, this is copyright infringement. You're taking our books and you're using them for your own purpose without compensation. But the other thing they did, which was incredibly stupid as well as criminal, was they the way they got all these books was by going to a pirate site. They didn't even buy a single copy. They took all these stolen books, and the judge found against them for that and said this is stolen property, and everyone whose book has been used, and there is a site that you can go to that shows you your titles, every one of those books will receive compensatory, the author will receive compensatory, a check. So at the Authors Guild, we are taking on these large issues and protecting writers. So if any of you are thinking of signing a contract with a publisher, you can join the Authors Guild, and we have lawyers on our staff, and they will look at your contract. If you sign a contract and then the publisher scams you, we probably won't be able to help you, but we can help you if you ask us beforehand, and we will protect you from scammers, which is a big problem now. So join the Authors Guild.
Yeah, join it. So my last question to you, and I think I know what the answer is going to be. What are you working on now?
I don't ever talk about that.
I know. I know that. And why not? Because that's an interesting answer.
Because so when I first started writing, I remember telling a friend of mine, oh, I'm working on this great story. This happens and that happens. And she was fascinated and said, oh, that's so interesting. And then I went home and thought, I already told that story. I don't feel any impulse to write it anymore. So for me, it's a kind of closed system. It's a place where I live with this story, and I don't talk about it to anyone. When I was writing Cost, which is about heroin addiction, I had to learn what it was like to be a heroin addict. So I went to, I did a lot of research, which was all sort of in person, and I would go to NA meetings to find out how people felt, what it was like to be a heroin addict. But I didn't tell my husband. So it was like having an affair. The second he was out the door, I was on my computer looking up the next NA meeting, and I would shoot out to go to it without telling him where I was going or what I was listening to. Because if I had told him about it, I would have lost the energy that I needed to understand it myself. I would have told him. I'd say, there was a woman who said this, and that would have leached out the drive that I need in order to keep that person's information intact for my book.
Thank you. Wonderful.
So we have some time for some Q&A. Does anyone have a question for Roxana? Oh, Deborah?
Abby, I'll be right there.
Thank you for being here. And in general, thank you for writing, period. I'm very curious about what happened to you during COVID. I read an interview. It could have been on the Guild website, I don't remember, where you shared a little bit of what happened to you as a writer. And now that we're further along from COVID, have you reflected back and seen other things of how it impacted you?
That's such a good question. One of the things about writing, and particularly writing fiction, is that it takes a long time. Nobody knows why, but for that information to become a source of fiction. When I wrote Sparta, we invaded Iraq in 2003, I think, and my book was the second novel. I think it came out in 2014 to come out, and now there are lots of novels. Lots of people came back and wrote novels, but it takes when people have a big experience. First, it's the journalists, and they go and they set down the facts. That's their job. And next, it's the memoirists, the people who tell their own stories. And after that, and each one of these is spaced out in time. And novels, and then they're poets, but novels are the last. So it takes a long time to figure out what that experience actually was and how it affects your life. During COVID, my husband and I were in northwestern Connecticut in a very beautiful place, but it was a dark time for all of us, I think. One of the most useful things for me was I'm on the board of our local library, and I did a Zoom series on Anna Karenina. So every Tuesday afternoon for 9 weeks, I went on Zoom and we all talked about Anna Karenina. And it's on the library website. So if any of you have a book group that you want to do Anna Karenina with, you can go to it and use that. But it was a great way for me to escape from the present and to engage in a great work of art and to connect to other people. We had people from all over the country who were on that. Part of it was I would talk about the section that we had read, and I would read from it and talk about that, and then we did Q&A so that everybody could engage with something that was entirely apart from our day-to-day lives. So I felt that was very important for me to be able to leave the current, the daily life that I was part of and remind myself that art is a way of moving into another part of life.
You've talked about your fiction. You also wrote about a book about Georgia O'Keeffe. Can you tell us why you wrote that nonfiction book and why you chose Georgia O'Keeffe?
So Georgia O'Keeffe is my second book, and I used to work in the art world. I worked at Sotheby's and at a gallery, and I worked in the field of American paintings. That was what we sold, and I loved it. I loved American art, and I started writing about it while I was at Sotheby's. And Sotheby's was a great, great place to learn because we sold, I think, 1,000 paintings a year, which meant that I looked at probably 3,000 paintings. We turned away paintings instead of taking them. So I was a cataloger, so I would pick up each painting in my hands and turn it over to look at the back of it, look at the condition, look at the signature. So I came to know American paintings in a very intimate way, and I had to write about them. So it was a wonderful educational experience. And I started writing about them, and Georgia O'Keeffe was alive then. It was in the 70s. And we sold her work, and her dealer lived about 5 blocks from Sotheby's, and she was very helpful. I would talk to her about pictures that we had come in, and she would tell us the background of them. So I was in awe of O'Keeffe's work. I would have loved to have written about her, but you couldn't at that time. You couldn't write about her work because she had control of all the images, and she had copyright, which she had gotten because Stieglitz, her husband, had his photographs used without copyright. So she'd been very careful about that. And so there was very little written about her because you had to go to Doris Bree, her agent, and ask permission to write about the images, and Doris would say no. So there was sort of a bottleneck. So there was very little written about O'Keeffe. And I said to Doris once I wanted to write about her, and she said, well, if you ask her permission, she'll just ask me, and I'll say no. So it was really very, and you couldn't buy an O'Keeffe. O'Keeffe was very careful about her work, and Doris would buy back works that came up at Sotheby's. She kept the price high, but she also took the work. And it was all in a warehouse in New York. And there was no dealer. If you wanted an O'Keeffe, you had to get in touch with Doris. She would take you to the warehouse, and she would show you the pictures that she would allow you to see. She'd say, you can have your choice between these three pictures. And they'd say, but I know you have that great picture of the Patternelle. And she said, that's not available. This is what's available to you. So it was very tightly controlled. And at that time, there was a great, great exhibition at the Whitney of O'Keeffe. It was a retrospective. And those huge, late pictures of the sky were in that. And people came and had not realized the breadth of her work until that time. So it was really opening her work again to the world. And I loved her work. I would have loved to have written about it, but Doris made it clear I was not going to. And then I left the art world and moved out to the country and was writing fiction. And one day my husband came home. We lived in Katona. And he said, I was on the train coming out with Edward Burlingame, who's a friend of ours, and he was also editor-in-chief at Harper and Row. And Edward said to Tony, and that had never happened. We'd been living there for years, and the Burlingames were good friends of ours, but they had never been on the train together. Edward said to Tony, Georgia O'Keeffe has just died, and there isn't a big biography of her. Who do you think we should get to write it? And Tony said, Roxana. And Edward said, well, I know she writes fiction, because I had sent him a novel, which he had rejected. He said, but we need someone who knows about American art. And Tony said, she does. And Edward said, oh. And so Tony came home and told me this story. And I said, well, first of all, Edward's just being polite. He's a friend of ours, and so he doesn't want to be rude. But this is Harper and Row. This is going to be a big book for them. They're not going to ask somebody who once worked in an auction house and has written some essays for art magazines. They're going to ask a curator or somebody with a PhD. They're not going to ask me. He's being polite, but he's not going to ask me. Secondly, the only reason I was writing about art was that I couldn't get my fiction published. Now my fiction is getting published. I have a novel coming out next year, and my stories are getting published in the New Yorker and the Atlantic. So I can't do both, so I'm quitting. I'm not writing about art anymore. I don't want to write about art. So A, he won't ask me, and B, if he did, I would say no. And Tony said, well, I just thought I'd tell you. And I say, thank you, but not going to happen. And that was on Friday, and on Monday, Edward called and said, would you be interested in writing the biography of Georgia O'Keeffe? And I said, yes. So that's how that happened.
Thanks. I think it's the author, Anne Lamott, who gave advice to other writers that you're often having to kill your darling babies. Mainly, you have sentences you love, you want them in your book, you want them somewhere, but they just don't fit. Did you have that experience? Darling, she said, you have to kill your little darlings. And I'm wondering, did you have that experience with things you just wanted to put in but couldn't?
Well, as I say, every sentence poses that problem for me. Every sentence is a darling. But Hemingway said that whatever you take off the page is still there. So sometimes I will write 3 pages of dialogue and then get to the end of it and think, actually, that's all already contained in this book. And I'll delete the whole thing because now I understand it. Now I know what they would have said in those circumstances, but it was slightly digressive, so I don't need it. I might write 1 sentence to say that they had disagreed. So it's part of writing. Yeah. Good question.
Okay, we have another question over here.
A more simplistic question, and that is, what do you think about using AI for research purposes, particularly of the library type?
That's a question everyone is talking about now. And we just had a conversation about it at the Authors Guild. And you may not know this, but there is a reporter for the New York Times who's been fired because he used it for research. And without his being aware of it, something that he had found on the Guardian site, a review, found its way into his text without him. He looked at the piece, thought he had internalized it, but somehow it got into his text. So I think it's really insidious. For myself, I still use Google, and I haven't done an intensively research-based book since Dawson's Fall, which came out 6 years ago. So it wasn't an issue for me then. But there was another novelist who was part of this conversation at the Authors Guild, and she said, I would never use AI for anything. It is destroying the planet. It is destroying our minds. If you are a writer, it has to be your words on the page. It can't be anybody else's. So I love that. I don't use it, and I don't consciously use it for research, but I realize that if I Google something, the first thing that comes up turns out to be AI, and often I will click on read more. I have to figure out a way to get it off my computer for those reasons. And the same thing is true really of Google research, anything that you do on your computer. And they have done research on students. If you read something on Google and you cut and paste and put it into something, you aren't really learning it. If you write it by hand, if you take notes by hand, it gets into you internalize it much more thoroughly and usefully. So cutting and pasting from anything is kind of counterproductive as a writer. It's not really getting into your brain. You're just transferring something from here to there. It's a problem. We're all trying to struggle with it. And there are a lot of people who say, I use it for research, but I would never use it for writing. And then there's one friend of mine who's a good writer, and she sent me an email and she said, am I crazy or is this wrong? And she said a friend of hers has been working on a novel for 10 years. He's now discovered AI. He's gotten AI to help him with the plot, help him with the narrative, help him with the dialogue and the characters, and he's thrilled because he thinks he's modern and this is exciting. And she said, am I crazy? Is he wrong? And I said, you're not crazy. That's really dangerous. And so it's something that we have to deal with very, very carefully. And if I were doing a lot of research, I would have to disable the AI function because I don't want a single word from it getting into my text, not a word. It's a good question, and we had nonfiction writers on in our conversation who said they use it for just that. It's very useful in finding remote arcane sources, for example. So it's a problem. Yeah, and people deal with it differently.
Well, I want to take this moment to just say how much it's such an honor to meet you, Roxana, again. Actually, we met about 5 years ago. And thank you, Nan, for stepping in and helping us all to understand Roxana's process a little more and be inspired once again by your work.
Thank you so much for having me.